Hello again, Michael Ware with the Iowa Firearms Coalition. I usually spring right into a enthusiastic introduction of our guest, and I am enthusiastic about this, but I need to offer a disclaimer today. We're going to be tackling some stuff that's very deep, very emotional, very heavy. Not that every discussion that we have isn't vitally important and valuable for edification and understanding. But Ryan Petty is going to walk us through some pretty serious stuff today, and we need to come about this in the right way. So as I introduce Ryan Petty this morning, I want us to all basically take and make a prayer that the Spirit speaks to us and guides us through this discussion as we listen to it, and about the actions and the thoughts that we take away from it. So today, we have Ryan Petty with us. And I might have known about you through tech circles or whatever else, because you're self-described, you're muted, by the way, you're self-described as a serial entrepreneur, but that's not how I came to know about you. So I'm going to share the screen from your website that talks about that. And Ryan, would you introduce yourself and lay out the basis for our discussion today, please?
Sure, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, first of all, and glad to be talking with your audience in Iowa. Explain a little bit about how we met. We have a mutual acquaintance, Mr. Nathan Gibson, a good friend of mine. Worked with Nathan in the past at one of my prior roles at ADT. Nathan and a group, probably the most talented software development group I've ever worked with. They're from Iowa in Des Moines, worked on a big project for us at ADT, kind of rethinking home security and building that out. And that project turned into friendships, and those friendships have turned into lifelong friendships. So I'm grateful for those and grateful to be here today. My name is Ryan Petty. I currently serving as the vice chair of the Florida State Board of Education. I am, as Michael mentioned, a serial entrepreneur and I guess technology executive. I've had a couple of those companies do well, and I ended up working for a big company for a few years, and then I seemed to split off from that and go back and try to do it all over again. I'm currently helping small startups raise capital, build their businesses up, and hopefully grow into successful companies as the managing partner of EVO Group. And I'm excited to always love being around technology entrepreneurs and the enthusiasm, excitement, the energy. I just love it. Yeah. So it's hard not to be involved in that. So my primary focus at this moment has been technology startups that are in the school safety space. Got a couple of interesting clients there. One company called Xponse that I'll give them a little shout out here. They're trying to redefine the emergency response to school tragedies. And so, but most importantly, Michael, I'm a husband and a father. That's the stuff I do during the day. That's the stuff that keeps the lights on and pays the bills. But my most important job is being a husband and a father. And for those that don't know the story, we're going to get into this a little bit, but my daughter Elena was sitting in her freshman English class on February 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day, when a gunman walked into her school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and began opening fire indiscriminately, trying to kill as many people as possible. And unfortunately, my daughter was sitting in her freshman English class, and the killer was able to see her through the small window in the door and took her life and the lives of two other of her classmates in that classroom. we'll talk about how that happened a little bit, I'm sure, and a little bit about what we can do to keep kids safe at school. But that day, my family was forever changed, and my life was changed. And I have spent a lot of time in the past 7 years working to make schools safer. First part of that was really learning and understanding how this happens and why it happens, and what we can do to prevent these. And now my mission has really been to help companies at this point. Well, we've changed a lot of laws and done a lot of things. Michael, you and I are going to get into that. We're going to talk about what needs to happen there. But as I mentioned, now I'm spending some time with some startups that are bringing technology, which is a part of the solution. It's not all of the solution, but it's a part of it. And so I've been working on that. We miss just a little bit about Elena. Elena was, as I mentioned, a freshman member of the JROTC program at school. And if you would have asked me, a few years before, if Elena had any interest in sports and that kind of thing, I would have told you no. She likes to do girly things. And the only exception was she liked to go to the range with her father. She enjoyed shooting. That was one of those activities that all of my kids enjoy. And we spent a lot of time together at the range. And she was she was young, but she was so proud of her ability to hit the target and get close to the bullseye and all those things. And so there was a little bit of a competitive streak in her that we didn't pick up on early enough. But once she joined JROTC, she became part of that team, and got to see her just as a freshman really helping and encouraging the other students that were a member of her team, encourage them to do things that they weren't sure they were capable of doing. And that was just a wonderful thing for my wife and I to experience and to learn about our daughter. And we miss her every day. Everything we try to do now is to honor her memory and what she meant to us and the kind of person she was. And the real challenge has been, picking up the pieces and trying to, as a father, keep my family together, keep them moving forward, keep them focused on their lives, because a tragedy like this can absolutely devastate a family. And I'm sure we'll talk about this, but faith has been an important element in helping to, I won't say completely heal yet, because I think we're still working through that process, but it's been an important part of keeping our family moving forward. Let me say it that way, moving forward. So that's a little bit about me, Michael.
Well, thank you for being here this morning. I am already, everybody listening to this, anybody watching this is going to have their heartstrings tugged on a little bit, because they're probably, fathers or mothers, or they have family, they have friends. I mean, nobody's living in total solitude and watching and listening to YouTube. That's not how this works. So I'm already found a couple spots where I was choking back the tears, because I've got a sophomore daughter, and I'm thinking through what you're saying, and I'm envisioning Elena in the classroom. I'm envisioning her with her friends, and then helping somebody that she knows needs help. And those are admirable qualities. And I'm putting that into, I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking, and I'm watching my own daughter do those same types of things. So there are relates here that almost anybody is going to have. And to be frank, it's probably okay if we get a little emotional, because you'd have to be pretty stone cold not to. So for the people listening and watching out there, like, Michael's bawling like a little girl. Okay, fine. He is. You and I spoke in preparation for this. I tend to be that way anyway. There are crappy movies that I cry like a little girl in, and my daughter and my wife make fun of me. So that's going to be part of it from time to time. But the emotion aside, I wanted to thank you for the willingness to come on. I wanted to thank you and obviously your family. I don't think that maybe this gets talked about enough, but Ryan, I know that you're not able to come on a program like this. You're not able to do the things that you are doing before and since. You're not able to go and become a vice chair of education in the state of Florida to do these kinds of things without the backing of support at home. You might be able to push through with some level of success, but the truth of the matter is, I know that you have family and loved ones that back you so that you can do what you do well. So I want to thank them as well. So thank you all, everybody who has contributed to Ryan Petty being here today and the culmination of this conversation. So thank you from the bottom of my heart very much.
Thank you, Michael.
How would you like to begin? Would you like to walk us through basically what brought us to here, and we'll chase a few rabbits? Is that okay?
I think that's great. We'll start. Let's go back to February 14th, and I'll start that day, and we'll go through that, and then we can as we chase the rabbits, we'll go back a little bit and see what led up to February 14th. But for me, February 14th started out like almost any other day. I got up early for work. My work was down in a suburb of Miami. It was about an hour and a half away from Parkland. So I needed to get up early, and I had been focused on what at the time to me was super important. It was a budget meeting, right? It was budget for next year. These are important things, at work, and you need to show up and you need to be 100%. So I had been very focused on that for the prior week, been working with my team, went down to the meeting, left early, didn't get a chance that morning to say goodbye to Elena. Or my other kids that went to school that day, because I need to be in the car and on my way. Went to the meeting. The meeting went well. Couldn't have asked for a better meeting. I was sitting in my boss's office around 2:00. So the meeting was all morning, so it was 4 or 5 hour meeting. We were just kind of decompressing and reviewing what had happened. And I started getting text messages. You feel that buzz in the pocket, or you hear the ding of the phone. And I've learned my wife and I have agreed, we communicate when I'm at work, but it's one of those things like she'll send me a message and she knows that I'll get back to her just as soon as I can. I may be in a meeting, I may be presenting, I may be talking to somebody on the phone, and so she's usually very patient, but the next text came back very quickly. And then a third one, and I'm sitting there and my boss comments on it and says, somebody's really trying to get a hold of you. You might want to take a look at that. So I said, what you might do in front of your boss, excuse me, let me take a look. And I looked at it, and the text I saw was, I think there's been a school shooting. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but my wife had sent, I think there's been a school shooting at the kids' school. I'm trying to get a hold of the kids. Call me as soon as you can. And my initial thought, Michael, was, okay, this is, we hear about these things. Usually they're hoaxes, bomb scare, whatever, that I didn't think a whole lot of it initially because for two reasons. One is, didn't think it could happen at my kids' school. That we'll come back to that. I'm sure we'll come back and talk more about that. And number two, I thought was probably just a hoax. And so I put my phone back in my pocket, continued the conversation. I let my boss know that my wife thought there might have been a school shooting. And then I started getting some more texts, and they were more urgent. And my wife had been able to make contact with our son, our youngest son, who confirmed that there had been a shooting. So now we know it's real, and she can't get a hold of our daughter, Elena. So I mentioned that to my boss, and he says, get out of here, go home. You need to be home, just leave. And so I'm grateful for his compassion in that moment, because I did need to be home. Whether my kids had been impacted or not, we didn't know, but we certainly didn't know about Elena, but I needed to go home. So I started the process of driving home, and it took 2 hours to get home because every emergency vehicle in South Florida seemed to be heading north. So I became more and more worried. And I started praying, of course, and just hoping that, very selfishly, that my kids would be okay, that everything would be fine. And somebody that we go to church with started a text group, and we started trying to find each other's children. Hey, have you heard about this, whatever. And just through that network, trying to find and locate people. Well, we got it down to 2. Everybody was accounted for except Elena and one other young lady that we went to church with. Her name was Maddie Wilford. Well, it turns out Maddie had been shot, and she was on her way to the hospital. She survived, but she was on her way to the hospital. Nobody had heard or seen or knew anything about Elena. By the time I get to Parkland, absolute chaos. I'm witnessing people at traffic intersections fighting, getting out of cars and fighting. I mean, it was pandemonium. The emergency response was horrific, and we can talk about the response to Parkland by law enforcement. It was absolute chaos. Somehow, I think a combination of prayer and just knowing the back roads, I was able to get to my wife, who told me we were going to a reunification center at a hotel next to the school, or close to the school, about a mile away from the school. We would meet in a conference room, and she was going to go there to get our son, and that I could meet her there. So I made my way there, got to that reunification center around 5 o'clock. I think it was maybe a little bit after 5 o'clock. Very disorganized, very chaotic. I would say the deputies that I interacted with were borderline rude. Who are you? Why are you here? Do you need to be here? And at that point, we had been notified. My wife had been notified by law enforcement that our family needed to be at the reunification center. And so we knew that was one of 2 things. Elena had been seriously wounded, or she had been killed. And the thing that haunts me to this day is we kept looking at the Find My Phone feature on our iPhones, and we could see Elena's phone. It was in her classroom, and it wasn't moving. And Michael, at that point, I kind of, as a father, you kind of know. My wife says she felt like she knew too, that she had that mother's intuition, and I kind of put 2 and 2 together. The fact that we had been called in, the fact that we couldn't see her phone moving. And of course, you're holding out hope. You're praying and holding out hope that maybe she just dropped her phone on her way out, trying to evacuate, and then in chaos or whatever, she just got out of there. But it turns out, no, that her phone, she had her phone with her, and she was not moving because she had been killed in her classroom. We didn't find that out until 2 a.m. So we sat there for, what is that? 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, something like that, about 10 hours, waiting to learn the fate of our daughter, who at that point we presumed, she had been killed. And I won't go into the reunification center and all of that. It's very negative experience, as you can imagine. This is the worst day of our lives. It was the worst day of the lives of many of the people in that room. And none of us felt like we were treated with any kind of dignity or respect. And that was unfortunate. And that's one of the things I'm proud to say we fixed in Florida, that we'll handle things differently going forward when there is a tragedy. But we found out about 2 a.m. We were surrounded by good friends and our church leaders who stayed with us the entire time, just to be with us. I mean, what can you say? What can you say? What can you do? They just were there. And that's really what we needed, was just people there, so we didn't feel like we were alone.
Well,
and
that's the definition of fellowship. And that's precisely why we do this. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, they were just there. We went home and we had to let our other kids know. And that was probably, the hardest thing I've ever had to do was let my oldest daughter, Megan, who she and Elena were very close and loved each other, shared clothes, and, everything sisters do. She was absolutely unable to process what she was hearing from us. And as a father, I felt absolutely helpless. There was nothing that I could physically do to comfort her. We prayed together as a family. We talked, we sat. But just watching her, try to process what had happened. And I knew the questions going through her mind, and I didn't have answers for a lot of them. So that was a difficult day. We went to bed that night, woke up the next morning. I remember as I woke, I was thinking, hopefully that was just a really bad dream. and then it very quickly set in that it was in fact real. Our ecclesiastical leaders, our church leaders, were back over at our house early the next morning. They were making basic decisions like making sure we had breakfast, figuring out what we could eat. I mean, we couldn't even figure out what to eat. I mean, I knew I was hungry, but Michael, I couldn't have made a decision. As simple as what do I want for breakfast that morning? We were just absolutely devastated. And so I'm grateful for folks that were willing to come in and, to your point, and fellowship and be there for us and make decisions, recognize that we were incapable of making decisions, not judge us for that, or feel any way other than a Christ-like love for us and a willingness to just step in and do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And it was absolutely wonderful. And I can never thank them enough or repay that debt. I can pay it forward. I can't repay them. They're wonderful people, wonderful friends. And we made it through those first days. I would argue because of their friendship. I'll give another shout out to a good friend of mine. Speaking of friendships, one of my good friends from high school. We started 2 companies together. Actually, we went to college. We were college roommates together. Started 2 companies together. This is a dear friend. He took 2 weeks of his vacation and just came out and stayed with us. Now he got a hotel. He didn't want to impose on us as a family. He would have been welcome to stay with us, but he just would show up in the morning, handle everything that we needed handled, and then he'd, I guess, go get dinner by himself and a few things, and sometimes we'd eat together. But yeah, I'm so grateful for friends like that were just willing to drop everything in their lives and be with us and help us during those times. And that was February 14th and the days after, in the immediate aftermath of February 14th.
Okay. There are people listening right now, Ryan, that would logically process this and say, this is horrible, this is horrific, I can't imagine, or I wouldn't even know what to do. It wouldn't, and they're thinking to themselves, well, it's not me to go and come alongside people, whatever else. And the truth of the matter is, if you're thinking that, or that's something that you're pondering, you couldn't be more wrong. It is in you. You may not know that, but really what people need is they need your presence. They need you alongside them. So if you're a friend, if you're family, that kind of stuff, I would tell you, don't be afraid about not knowing what to say or not what to do, because you may not, that it's unlikely that you would, but that you love somebody, that you love a family, and whether that's, it's philia, Greek for brotherly love. Okay, fine, go do that. Be there. And it'll be obvious if you shouldn't be there. You give them time, space, whatever else. But I think that we're not designed to go through this alone. And if so, do it well. So the fellowship associated with loving kindness that comes alongside you may make all the difference in how these things are handled. And so for anybody listening to this, don't give in to doubt and withdraw. Engage and come alongside people, come alongside strangers. Okay, that's part of it. So anyway, February 14th, moving forward, Ryan.
Yeah. So we tried to pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. I will say that it was several days before we could engage, we had the TV off, and we just sort of tried to spend time together, just being there for each other. And of course had the love and friendship, as I mentioned, that helped us get through. There were a couple of things that happened, Michael, that really changed the course of how I thought I would respond to this. And I agree that you don't often know whether you've got it in you, except until it happens and you have no other choice, right? Your back is up against the wall, so to speak, and you just have to do things. A couple of things that were very instrumental. And I want to, before I talk about the two things that kind of changed that course, I do want to say that I recognized very quickly after the hand of God in my life leading up into that. I had some opportunities to serve in our church, to serve people. It was a big sacrifice for me because it took up all of my Saturday, or most of my Saturday. And you work Monday through Friday. Sunday set aside for worship. Saturday for me was the time to get all the chores done, mow the lawn, all the things you got to get done, right?
Stuff. Yeah.
And I was asked by one of our church leaders to volunteer and to take a good portion of my Saturday and do that, and to help others get closer to our Savior. And my initial reaction was I don't have time. There's no way I can do this. It's just, you look at the calendar, you say it's not going to work. And I softened my heart, or the Lord softened my heart, and I said yes and accepted it. And for 18 months, I did this. And somehow it seems like, Michael, I had more time. I was able to get things done in a way that I can't explain. But what I didn't realize at the time was God was preparing me for what was about to happen. He knew my capacity to handle this kind of a tragedy needed to be increased, and the only way to increase that was to serve others, and help them get closer to Christ, and in my own way getting closer to our Savior by doing so. And that was an important element. I don't want to forget that. The low point was turning on the TV, and I saw a couple of things, Michael. The gun control groups had descended on Parkland, and the media had descended on Parkland, and it was an absolute chaotic mess. What I didn't know at the time was that the extent to which the gun control groups had descended, and how they use tragedies like this as an opportunity to recruit people to their side of the argument about guns and the Second Amendment. And they never let a tragedy go to waste, right? So they were there in force, and they were the ones behind, sort of the most famous thing about Parkland. One of the most famous things are the kids. This ostensibly, grassroots movement of kids that were realizing spontaneously that gun control was the answer to all of society's problems. And nothing could have been further from the truth. The very organized and well-funded groups were there. They were sending money. The Hollywood folks, George Clooney and others had made big donations to these groups. And it was very well organized and very well orchestrated. None of it. And I woke up to this, and I kept thinking, we don't even know what happened yet. We don't know why it happened, yet these people are already jumping to the solution. That didn't make any sense to me. It started to make me angry, to be honest with you, because I wanted to get to the bottom, and I was trusting at the time that our local law enforcement officials would get to the bottom of this. I found out subsequently that our state leaders, and I'll talk about this, the state leaders weren't so trusting of the local leaders, and they were going to put their own investigative body together, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission, which I was appointed to by then Governor Rick Scott. and we were tasked with investigating the tragedy. What happened? Why did it happen? What was the background? And then to make a series of recommendations to our state legislature about how to fix this problem. So I'm very honored to be a part of that for the past 7 years. And we'll talk about some of those changes in a minute. But that was, I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what happened and why. And these kids were out there. And quite frankly, our school officials and local law enforcement were out there blaming the gun, blaming the firearm. Too easy to get guns, too easy to get these weapons of war, and all the things that they say constantly when they're trying to demonize firearms and gun owners. And so they were out there doing that. The second thing that happened was you may remember there was a town hall hosted by CNN.
Yeah.
And there was a group of angry Parkland residents, the kids, and then two folks that I later got to grow closer to. Senator Rubio came into that environment knowing that he was going to be attacked, and he was attacked viciously. Mm-hmm. And here's a senator that doesn't have anything to do with gun policy in the state of Florida, and they're attacking him. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make any sense, but they wanted the circus. And then a person that I was acquainted with for a number of years, didn't know her very well, but was acquainted with her enough to know that I liked her very much. And that was Dana Lash and she was at the time, she was on NRA TV. Dana and I have become friends, and Dana and Senator Rubio were mercilessly attacked, and that made me angry. Here are two people that came in to ostensibly have a discussion with the other side, a debate. It was nothing close to a debate. It was an attack. It was an ambush, and it was perpetrated by the folks at CNN, and I think orchestrated by the gun control groups.
Yeah,
who they are the mouthpieces for. So that made me angry. Still didn't know what to do about this. I was starting to get very upset with the course and the direction and the things that were happening. And then a third thing happened. This Parkland father, Andrew Pollack, got attacked by the same media and residents of Parkland because he had been wearing a Trump shirt. And all of these things seemed unfair. That led up to one day we're sitting at the funeral home. We're making arrangements for Elena. I get a call from then Governor Rick Scott, who calls me not as a politician, but as a father and a grandfather, and has a very heartfelt conversation with me about Elena, and about the tragedy, and about how concerned as a father and grandfather he is about the safety of our kids. And then he says, "Hey, I'm going to do something about this. I don't care what anybody thinks politically. I'm going to work on this. Would you come help me do this?" And I said, "Well, I need to understand what you're talking about. I want to make sure I understand the plan a little bit."
Yes, of course. Yes.
But we went up. He invited me to tour the state with him. We went and talked with law enforcement officials and did a number of press conferences. And I ended up speaking to both the Florida Senate and the Florida House, encouraging them to consider legislation that would be forthcoming that I believed would help solve the problem. And that was called the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act. Now, Michael, I will tell you, and I think it's in full disclosure, it's important for your audience to understand, there were a couple of elements of gun control in there. Florida passed a red flag law, and Florida raised the age to purchase a long gun from 18 to 21. Those are both things that I have regretted being associated with or part of or advocating. I was advocating for the school safety measures. Those were things that came along. I questioned them at the time. And I was told, because of political expediency, because of needing to get votes from both parties, those were things that were absolutely must-haves in the bill to be able to get a majority to get it passed. And I believe that to be true, but I've regretted both of those, participating in both of those. And in fact, am working this year with the Florida legislature, and I've advocated for this and supported it and spoke with the sponsoring representatives in both chambers about this. And I think we're going to get it passed. We're going to eliminate that law that prohibits 18 to 21-year-olds from purchasing long guns in the state of Florida. And we're working towards the red flag laws. But I'll tell you, the sheriffs in Florida really like those red flag laws. Once you give in and give them a red flag law, it's really hard to get law enforcement to step back from that. We can talk about that, or we can talk about that in a future conversation. But
well, it's human nature, Ryan. And I've been thinking about this since you started talking about you woke up the next morning and turned on the television, and there was shock and anger and outrage at what you were seeing. I watched an interview with a famous high-profile pastor that was talking about this specifically, and when he learned, and you could almost, it's not a mischaracterization all for me to say to you, you could see the twinkle in his eye when he said, yeah, we learned about it. And I said, wheels up, in 15 minutes, we got to get there. I didn't sense, nor did this person say in any way, that they dropped to their knees when they heard, and they prayed that everybody there was saved unto him, right? This is a pastor, and you'd think that would be the default and automatic position. And maybe that happened. I wasn't there in the room. But none of those things were mentioned. It was how quickly we could get on a private jet and get down there so we could get in front of a camera. And it didn't seem to me that there was a sincerity there. It didn't seem like there was a genuine nature towards what was true of a thing. It seemed like they were interested in propaganda, or they were interested in pushing forward whatever their idea had ought to be. And unfortunately, and this isn't a swipe at law enforcement, unfortunately, when sheriffs fall into the position of power, meaning I choose to say yes to you or say no to this person because I know better, that's something that they don't often say, I must know myself and my proclivities, and I must step back from these things, or else I'll make a mess of it. They almost never do that. So when we used to have Jim Crow laws here in the state of Iowa, and we still have a lot of people that think that way. Mm-hmm. And Jim Crow laws have permeated a lot of laws, especially around the Second Amendment, because it gave elected officials or somebody else or a policymaker the ability to say no to somebody or something they didn't like.
Yeah.
And once it's there, as you're saying, it's very hard to get dislodged. But I'm really glad to hear you say, yes, this was something that we did. And no, I don't think in retrospect it was that good, and I'm trying to correct it. So thank you for that. Please continue.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think the real solution here was not the red flag law and the disruption of due process. And I'll be honest, at the time, I don't think I really understood. I think a combination of grief and just not fully understanding the implications of due process, the violations of due process that red flag laws represent. Look, our red flag law is not as bad as a lot of these things. It requires law enforcement to be involved, but the real solution to this, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, Michael, but if red flags come up in Iowa, and I don't remember if Iowa has a red flag law or not, but we have something called the Baker Act, which is civil confinement. It's, compulsory civil confinement. What the problem with it was so bad, it was so difficult to implement that law enforcement really stopped using it. And so when this red flag thing came along, it's really easy to do a red flag. You write up a report, it's probable cause, you go in front of a judge, and they almost, like 99% of the time, the judge grants it, right? Yeah. They take the word of the officer. Now, if you've got a law enforcement officer that you trust and that's a good person, and you've got a sheriff that's a good person and you trust them, they're probably not putting in bogus red flag laws, but it only takes one bad law enforcement officer, only takes one bad sheriff for that to not be true. What we should have done, and the real issue, and the reason I'm so opposed to red flag laws now, due process is one. That's my first objection. The second one is we're only taking firearms from people. If somebody's a threat to themselves or others, why would we just limit that to firearms? We saw what happened in New Orleans. A guy put bombs out on the street and then drove through a crowd of people. If somebody's actually a threat, what we need to do is commit them through a process. It's got to go through court. It's got to respect due process, but we need to get them the help they need. And if that has to be compulsory, then it has to be compulsory. But there is a process to civilly confine somebody that requires respect for due process and allows for them to be represented by counsel and all of that. And what we've done, unfortunately, with red flag laws is we've taken the easy way out. We take some firearms away from somebody, but we don't stop them as an actual threat. And my whole goal the whole time, the reason I initially supported red flag laws was my belief was we've got to stop these threats right before, and law enforcement keeps missing these threats.
Yeah.
Their answer was red flag laws. So anyway, we could talk for an hour on red flag laws, but the point is we need to honor due process. And if somebody's truly a threat to themselves or others, we need to deal with that as the issue. It's not the firearm. It's not the gun. It's not guns. It's the person that wants to hurt themselves or others. So, but I digress. And so we got that Marjory Stoneman Douglas bill passed. And I'm really proud to say that, with the exception of the firearms provisions, everything else we did, and that was common sense. Let me talk about what we did. We lock doors in our schools now. We lock gates. We have resource officers at every school. We have what's called the Florida Guardian Program, where guardians are armed and in our schools, and they have a job. And that job is simply to stop a threat. Anytime somebody comes onto that school that's a threat to life, the guardians are going to act. And we have not only one person that's armed. In many cases in Florida schools, we have multiple people that are carrying firearms. So that whole gun-free zone thing doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We know that makes schools a soft target. And now these guardians absolutely are there and have provided a deterrent effect that is hard to measure, but we know it's real. And let me tell you something else about the Guardian program. When we considered the Guardian program and expanding it, in fact, what we did, what our legislature did at the recommendation of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Commission, was we expanded it to allow teachers to carry, because initially it was just school security personnel, and then we expanded it to include teachers that want to go through the training and carry. And Michael, we heard all sorts of, horrible things were going to happen. Guns would get into the hands of students. Guns would be left in cars and on desks and in desks, and, kids were going to die and all these bad things were going to happen. And I'll tell you, none of those things happened. None of the bad things have happened. I can count on one hand the number of negligent discharges we've had by a guardian in the entire time. And you know what? I think both cases, one of them might have been in a school, no one was around. The other one was a negligent discharge at home. It just didn't. We haven't had the problems, and we have thousands of guardians, Michael. Thousands. There are 4,000 schools in the state of Florida, 2.8 million students, and not a single one has been harmed or hurt or anything by a guardian. So it's been an absolute massive success. And so I would encourage any state that's looking to tackle school safety, lock the doors, make sure you know who's on your campus. Single point of entry is what we like to see, one place for visitors to come and go. And then make sure your schools are not gun-free zones. Make sure they're lots of guns on those campuses, and those guns are trained and they know exactly what to do and how to act, because as one of my good friends and my local sheriff here says, when seconds count, minutes don't matter. And responding law enforcement is minutes away from stopping a school shooting. The only chance you have of stopping it and saving the most lives possible is to have an armed response on that campus that can respond within seconds. And those are the things that we've done in Florida that have been incredibly helpful. And I know we're going to talk about some other things too, Michael. We'll talk about prevention, but I'm proud of what we've done there. And we have not yet had, and I knock on wood every time I say this because it's not impossible for this to happen, but we have not had another Parkland style attack in Florida. And I think it's because potential attackers understand that if they step onto a school in Florida, they're going to be met with deadly force very quickly.
Well, you've mentioned gun-free zones, and that they're the kindest way to put it is they're a misnomer, but the truth is they're absolutely crazy. They're the antithesis of safety. And I don't know if everybody listening actually understands why. When you put a sticker on a building and say this is a gun-free zone, the good guys, as always, or usually, obey those, and the bad guys simply do not. That's problem one. And you'd think that was enough. Unfortunately, what happens in the culture that we have now, where we really don't pay much attention to our instincts, and the culture is telling us not to behave on instinct any longer, to suppress that. What we end up finding out is, I think I can make a case for you easily that it's a net reduction in awareness, because people are under the false impression, well, this is a gun-free zone, therefore I'm safe. And they pay even less attention to their surroundings. They're not situationally aware at all. They may not have been that great before, but I assure you they're worse. And you actually walk around like a cow in a field grazing, and you don't pay any attention to what's going on around you. It's really bad. Gun-free zones disarm and remove the ability to stop threats. And everybody ends up being, I don't know, I shouldn't say it like this, but I think that we just get a little dumber. And that's not the direction we should go if we're truly going to stop threats and try and spare life. I don't know. Do you agree with that, or you think I'm off there?
No, Michael, you're 100% right. I mean, and we know this because we've got the manifesto from the shooter in Tennessee. And what was her decision process? Well, she wanted to kill, or she was going to go to a mall, but she thought she'd meet security at the mall. That was her first choice. And so what did she do? She chose the school because she knew the school, and she knew she wouldn't meet any armed resistance. So we know it goes through their heads. We know they're in their planning phase. They're thinking about this. Look, what we know about these school shooters is that most of the time they've got a plan. They develop a plan, right? And it's to maximize the number of casualties. That's really their plan. And so they may have maps of the school or mental maps that they'll walk through, and they're just planning on what they're going to do. Any resistance that they get, almost every case we see this, any resistance, you could throw a rock at them and disrupt. Michael, I know you know the OODA loop, right? This is the thing. You disrupt the OODA loop of these guys, and all of a sudden the plan falls apart. Oftentimes they set their firearms down. Let me talk about the killer in Parkland, what happened to him. So his plan was to shoot up as many kids in the hallways and classrooms as possible. What he didn't know is that the concussion of the rifle was going to set off the fire alarm and all that stuff like that. And so we had a bunch of kids. This is old thinking, but we had a bunch of kids released on the third floor of the building because they heard the fire alarm, and there was no delay in the fire alarm. Now, this gets into a little bit of nuance, but really what needs to happen is if there's a fire reported by the fire system, that should signal the office. The office should confirm there's a fire, and then they do the alert, and then they do the evacuation procedure. Michael, the pictures of the third floor hallway as the shooter, we did an animation on the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission as the shooter is walking down the second floor hallway, where, by the way, they had heard the shots and they had time to get into the safe areas, turn their lights off, block the windows on their doors. Not a single person was killed on that second floor because they got into the safe areas, locked the doors, blocked the windows. No one died. The third floor was full of students, 150 at least we counted in the image. Had he gotten to that third floor, Parkland would have been on a completely different scale of tragedy. Fortunately, most of those kids were able. He did shoot a couple of times in the second floor. Some kids did hear the shots and they did get back into most of them got back into their classrooms, but 6 more died, on that third floor unnecessarily because they couldn't get back into their classrooms and they had been let out.
Ryan, are you familiar with the Pulse nightclub at all?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so IFC just had Ed Monk come in and offer some free training that was centered around hardening targets such as churches, but it obviously crosses over into schools and businesses, and we've done that. And I remember one of the things he mentioned was the Pulse nightclub killer was famed in the news, and it still is. Oh, he wanted to kill, gay people, and he wanted to, destroy this community. Do you know what really happened? I mean, do you know much about it?
I know that wasn't actually his target.
He went to the first target, and there was armed security there, and he didn't even have to stop the car. He's like, this isn't going to work because there were people guarding the door. And then he went to a second target, same thing. And so he just, I'll go where the pickings are easy, so to speak. And he ended up driving down the road a little further, and there was nobody there or that appeared to be there. And in the guy went, and all kinds of calamity ensues. So when we talk about gun-free zones, I get really prickly because we should be truly honest about what they represent. They represent victims waiting to happen. I'm sorry for the people out there that don't like what I just said, but that is the truth. So it's high time that we think about what those things actually mean, and are we truly interested in stopping threats as quick as they can? I can't reiterate that enough to people. And let me back off a little bit because I have a tendency to jump on that soapbox pretty quickly, and I shouldn't do that.
No, you're 100% right, Michael. And you mentioned situational awareness. I mean, when I go into a restaurant now, I'm looking for exits. I always ask, my wife knows this. I always ask, I want to be able to sit where I can see who's coming in and out of the door, because I want to be able to be prepared for that. I want to know how to get out, alternate exits and things like that. And, these nightclubs, I don't go to nightclubs very often, but I know a lot of them are death traps, right? Whether it's fire or whatever, there's one entrance in and out, right? Because they're trying to make sure that you pay the cover charge, or they only let a certain number of people in,
right? And
it's really hard to get out. And they're almost always gun-free zones in Florida. I think these establishments that sell only liquor, that's a gun-free zone in the state of Florida. So to your point, this is why they choose their targets. These are evil people that want, let's just call it what it is. It's evil. And they want to inflict the most harm and pain on as many people as possible. And how do you do that? Well, you find a gun-free zone where your victims or your potential victims can't fight back. They're cowards. And this is even the ones that do it, for death by cop are cowards. They're not able to do it themselves. So they want somebody else to kill them. And so they go try to destroy a cop's life, getting them to shoot them. So gun-free zones, absolutely horrible idea. That's something that I don't know if we're ever going to be able to change at the federal level. That's one of those, for schools anyway, it's one of those federal, I believe it's a law. I don't even think it's a regulation that the Department of Education can change. I think it's Congress is going to have to act. But we know very clearly that these actors pick their targets because they want to meet the least resistance possible. Mm-hmm. So let's back up a little bit and talk about, I say back up, but let's talk about prevention a little bit, what some of the things we've learned. So one of the things I learned very early on, being a technology guy and a nerd, I was Googling, early on, how do you stop school shootings? And I bumped into an article, I believe it was on Forbes, that talks about, the title was like, if you want to stop school shootings, talk to the Secret Service. So Michael, I called the Secret Service, called the switchboard. They probably thought I was crazy. Wondered who's this guy calling. But I think I explained what I was looking for and trying to do. And I wanted to talk to somebody at the Secret Service that could help explain this article, what I had read there. And what I had read about was something called behavioral threat assessment and management. And what I also learned was this is a tool, if you will, that the Secret Service uses to assess threats to the president and other elected officials. And they had been for 20 years since Columbine providing research and evidence that behavioral threat assessment and management could be used to protect our nation's schools, because they had come to the conclusion that an assassin and a school, I'll use the term school shooter. I hate using it. It's really a school attacker. I prefer that term because there's all sorts of methods of attack, but a school attacker and an assassin have a lot of similar characteristics and motivations, and more importantly, have a lot of the same behaviors. And so that research led them to the recommendation that schools adopt this behavioral threat assessment and management model. And I will say, you'll bump into this around the country at different schools and districts, and they'll say, yeah, we do threat assessments all the time or whatever. But what I found, what happened in Parkland, was that there was some sort of threat assessment done on the killer. Actually, it was never completed because the administrator hadn't been trained on how to fill out the form correctly, and it was never submitted. So it was sitting on a hard drive at Marjory Stoneman Douglas for years, and had not been sent to the district office or to law enforcement, to anybody that could do anything. And what would have happened had that process gone through, in my belief is, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today, because I believe that if law enforcement, I'd like to believe, Michael, that if law enforcement knew what the school knew about his behavior at school and the threats he was making and the racial slurs and the weapons he was bringing to class, that they would have put two and two together with the 42 visits that law enforcement made to his home over the course of a number of years. That those two things put together, along with, we now require, our mental health professionals had a big role in this. And really what they did was treat the symptoms. I like to say they gave him mental Tylenol or mental aspirin. Sure. They didn't get to the root of what was causing. He attacked his mother multiple times. He kicked her teeth in one time. And they made excuses for him, and his mom made excuses for him, and she talked law enforcement out of arresting him. Now, had he been arrested and had some sort of a record, he wouldn't have been able to purchase a firearm, wouldn't be sitting here today. But 42 times they came out, multiple assaults, multiple attacks on small animals. He killed neighbors' pets and things over a number of years. He kicked another student in kindergarten. When you step back and look at the totality of everything that we knew about him, between the mental health domain, the school district information, and what law enforcement had, it was pretty clear this kid was on a path to what he did on February 14, 2018. But those silos of information, they weren't shared. And so what I learned through this behavioral threat assessment and management process is that lack of communication or broken lines of communication are really what allows these tragedies to happen. And that's what kills our kids and our teachers and our educators in the schools. It's not the firearm, it's lack of communication, Michael. And so what we have to do, and what we've done in Florida, I'm proud to say, is We have a very robust behavioral threat management model, we call it. Law enforcement, school district, and mental health are all components of that. They're all brought together in what's called a behavioral threat team at the school level, and communication lines are open. And I'm really pleased to report that after almost 7 years, we've got the educators like participating in these things willingly now. Like they really didn't want to do the law enforcement thing. They didn't want to share information. They threw up any number of objections, and we could spend all day talking about HIPAA and FERPA and all these federal laws that they throw up as excuses as to why they can't share information about threats. But we've overcome a lot of that. They're meeting together, they're communicating. And I know when we talked earlier this week, I mentioned, we had a case just a couple of weeks ago here in Florida where a kid was planning and he was acquiring weapons, and he had gotten to the point of acquiring airsoft guns, but he was going after more than that. He was planning an attack, and we found out about it through this behavioral threat management process, and we were able to intercept that. And there's dozens of stories like that are happening across the state of Florida because
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, I think that I'm sure that you know this, or I don't know, and I'm sure you do. Is the pushback against any kind of reporting or cross communication that they don't want to see the individual kid get rat-holed or stigmatized or whatever else into something negative that will affect them long term? Because if they are, that may be what they think, and I don't know if that actually happens or not like they think it will. But with the program you're talking about, have some of these kids that behaviorally had stood out, have they gotten some help so that they are less likely to have these proclivities or whatever else? I mean, because it would make sense that not that you would single these kids out so that you could not see a threat to others, but so they wouldn't be a threat to themselves. I mean, how does that work? Is that part of what's happening here or what?
Yeah, that's one of the objections educators would throw up was we don't want law enforcement in our schools because you're there just to arrest these kids and ruin their lives. And nothing could be further from the truth. Look, we all know there are bad cops out there and they do bad things, and most of the time we find out about it and they get punished. And I haven't met any school resource officers that are there or take any joy that are in our schools that take any joy about arresting a kid. That's the last thing they want to do. What unfortunately happened, Michael, is during the Obama administration, there were policies put in place. There was something called a Dear Colleague letter sent to educators that basically said, we believe your discipline policies are racist, and you need to adjust these policies or we are going to investigate your school district for civil rights violations. And a lot of educators, the response to that was to distance themselves even further from law enforcement. In the case of Broward County Schools in Parkland, where Parkland's located, the response was to hire a superintendent out of the Chicago Public Schools who had worked for Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education under President Obama, to come down and fix this. And he set about working with law enforcement and the juvenile justice system to create a program, which he called the Promise Program, which was to solve this problem. Michael, it was nothing more, when I tell you it was nothing more than a community relations campaign and a few PowerPoints, that's all it was. At the end of the day, we found out that's all it was. It wasn't really a program to help kids. It wasn't really. What he did was sign an agreement with the sheriff and the head of juvenile justice in the county, and they stopped arresting kids, basically. That was all they did. And then they went back to the community and said, arrests are down 53%. wow, look at this. This program's working. Well, the program wasn't doing anything. The sheriff just stopped arresting juveniles at the request of this school superintendent. The problem that we saw acutely in Broward County is a problem many of our public districts have, which is that administrators, look, some of them probably genuinely believe that law enforcement are bad people and they want to defund them and they don't want them in their schools and they don't think it can happen there. There's probably a few of those that actually believe that. The others don't like, look, if you're a school administrator and you want to get promoted, you want to go up you move up the track, what you need are good academic performance in your school, and you need as little to no disciplinary or violent incidents in your school as possible, right? That's your report card you get as a school administrator. So there's a professional incentive for a lot of these folks to sweep problems under the rug. And that was what we saw in Broward County. And that's what I see across the country, Michael, is
they juke the stats, man.
You got to juice the stats. That's exactly what they do. And so if some outside agency, whether it's law enforcement or mental health or the state education department, if somebody's looking and validating and verifying and holding them accountable, they don't like that because they can't juice the stats that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. I have rank and file police officers that come in my shop routinely, and they will tell you if they're from college towns. I mean, and they're not what you would call politicians because they're not the chief or the sheriff or a deputy sheriff or whatever else, or a major lieutenant. These are just beat cops, right? These are just road cops. And they'll tell you, oh, we're told not to do this, or it's not specifically said, but we get the eyeball when this and this and this go on. And most, not all, but most will tell you that they don't, it's the local college or the local school that doesn't want to have any arrests or any kerfuffles or scuffles come about because it'll make, such and such look bad, or it'll be reported on the news, or we won't be compared favorably to other schools in the Midwest or whatever else. So it's just easier if there isn't crime that's reported, so that it is giving the superficial appearance of actually being crime free. And it's basically, well, it's not basically, it's a lie.
It is. And I think, you and I can both agree. I've seen it in my career. The only way I can solve a problem is to really understand the truth, right? And numbers are a window into the truth. They're not always everything. There's a lot of other work you've got to do. But if you're trying to figure out what's wrong with a company, in my consulting business, I want to sit down. I want to look at the books, right? I want to understand, because I can understand your priorities based on what you spend money on and based on what you budget for. So numbers are an important element of that. One of the things that we do in Florida that I would recommend every state have this ability, but we audit the disciplinary reports for all of our districts on a monthly basis. They're reporting. They used to report at the end of the year, and it was always one of the things where they would just cook the books at the end of the year and send something up to the state. Hey, look, we require our superintendents to sign off on that. And Michael, as a state board of education, we can withhold the salary of superintendents.
So when you said we audit, we being the state education board?
That's correct. The state Department of Education audits those. We collect all that data. We put it into a system, and very soon we're going to publish that on our website for every Floridian to be able to see the actual disciplinary actions that are being taken down to the school level. So parents will be able to make a decision. One of the things that hasn't come out maybe as strongly as I wanted to in this conversation is everything we try to do in Florida respects the sovereignty of parents and that parental relationship with parents. When I talk about mental health in our schools, yes, we've got mental health counselors in our school, but the first action of that behavioral threat management team is to alert the parents to a problem. In the case where there's planning and weapons acquired, well, the first notification might be law enforcement showing up at the house to arrest that student for planning an attack. But we involve the parents because I believe very strongly that Government cannot usurp the rights and authorities of those parents. Occasionally we get parents that are uncooperative with that. Oh, my son wouldn't do that, or my son isn't doing that, or whatever, they don't believe it. And then you deal with those parents. You deal with those parents. Oftentimes, unfortunately, it goes through the criminal justice system to get them to believe it. But we involve the parents as early on in the process, because it's their child and they should be making those decisions on getting that kid back on the right path. So I will say a lot of times parents are unaware. It's shocking how many parents are unaware of what their kids are watching on social media, what they're doing on their phones, the games they're playing. I'm not saying any of those things necessarily are the causes of kids going down the wrong path. What I'm saying is some of these kids are getting in these chat rooms where they're talking about school shootings and they're being influenced by other kids that are thinking about it. And parents, you've got to understand what your kids are doing. It's your home. Those are often your devices. You're paying for the internet connection and the Wi-Fi, and you wouldn't let some of these people through your front door, but you're letting them in your house over the internet and on Wi-Fi. And I think parents need to wake up. And let me say one more thing on this, Michael.
Okay.
It's my belief, many of the problems, maybe I should use a stronger word. I'm certain most of the societal problems we're dealing with are because of breakdowns in the family structure. And too often what we ask for as citizens, unfortunately, is we ask government to solve those problems, right? Help me buy food, help me pay rent, help me do all these things. Instead of looking to family and church and community first, we go to the government. The government steps in. I can tell you it probably costs us on the education front 10 times what it would cost a family to correct a behavioral issue through the school and government process, that a family, if they just paid attention to what their kids are doing, provided them with wholesome activities, took them to church, just the basic things that families should do, it costs us 10 times more. When you get into the juvenile justice system, Michael, that's another 10x. If we haven't taught them to read and love to learn and given them the skills they need to acquire a job and be productive citizens, then we're going to deal with them in the criminal justice system, and that's 10 times more expensive. So as I step back, my plea would be to families, to parents, take some time to understand what your kids are doing. Be involved in their lives. Ask them questions. Find out what's going on at their schools. Just on the school safety piece, just ask them, hey, do you feel safe at school? What's going on there? Do you see anything that concerns you? And be willing to listen to them, because they will tell you if there are things going on that you should be concerned about as a parent.
I agree with you. It's kind of funny. We as human beings, we have, since, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, many people watching this are, even if you're not, you understand this concept. Since we're sinners, we have a proclivity towards making mistakes. Some of them are willing, some of them are inadvertent, but that's who we are. We should be honest about that. And, and when you think about this, we make these things really complex. Oh, I can't do this because, or I shouldn't do this because, or if I do this or we do that, then this might happen. Well, I understand wanting to get ahead of a problem, but we make things really, really complex. And it's kind of funny. The lawyers were trying to use the complexity of the law to trip up Christ, and said, well, why don't you tell us which is the most important commandment, or which ones are your favorites? I'm kind of seeing this conversation in my mind, and I'm, being a little romantic about it, but I'm thinking about how this might have come about. And Jesus is like, no, you're not going to trick me, and you're not going to trick anybody else. This is simple. Let me bring this full circle for you. Love him and love one another. Yeah. And it's like, if we could just get back to things like that and apply that universally when these things came up, then you'd be fine. I know that I'm chasing a little bit of a rabbit. Would you indulge me?
Sure.
Okay, so I had a brother come up to me the other day and say, I'm angry with this brother because of ABC, and I'm going to go call them on it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And probably, you'd find that kind of midway down through Matthew 18, right? Well, the short version is I kind of smelled a rat, and I said, okay, is this based on you seeing him sin, or is this based on he's just doing something you don't like? Well, probably the I don't like part. I said, okay, so do you want to give this person a gotcha moment, or do you love him so much that you're concerned that what he's doing is self-destructive or destructive to somebody else? And he sat back in his chair. He's like, what? And I said, I want to know if you're doing what it is that you think that you're doing, which is punitive, or about to do, which is punitive, if it's for his benefit because you love him so much, or are you doing this just because you want to do the gotcha thing? And he didn't have much to say after that. So he didn't ask himself if he loved God and loved one another. He loved this other person so much that this was necessary. He made it complex and then wanted to involve me and other people in it. And I'm like, no, I think you just need to take it back and ask yourself some basic questions, and the answers will be self-evident. Ryan, we don't do that anymore, and we don't apply that at all. And I got to tell you, not every problem that I could think of would probably be solved that easily. But boy, most of them would get better. I'm convinced of that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that story, because I think, so much we hear in modern society about my truth or my, whatever. And we've been conditioned that to push back on anybody's feelings or whatever is not honoring their true self or something like that. And really what we learn from Christ and others is, that in fact is exactly what we should do. The conversation you had with him, you decided not to jump in the pity party with him and encourage him to go off on this. And misery loves company, as they say. And I think, had you reacted to that differently, had you indulged him in the question he asked you initially, and his desire to want you to be part and parcel to what he was thinking of, or to validate his feelings or his approach, that's not what a good friend would do. I don't think that's what Christ would want us to do. He wants us to have those tough conversations. Sometimes they're uncomfortable. Sometimes those conversations, we might lose a friendship occasionally over those conversations. I hate when that happens, but if we truly love that other person, that's getting them to reflect on what they're doing and their behavior and their motivations. What you did was really ask him to figure out his motivations. Why are you doing this? I think at some point he'll be very grateful that you were willing to have that kind of a conversation.
I hope so. It sure didn't have anything to do with me. It was provided by a perfect person, the only one that walked the earth. So I'm glad that I was able to read about the lesson. But okay, so I probably shouldn't have chased that rabbit. I don't want to derail where we were going. So you were talking about some of the things that, like the Guardian program, and some of the things that the Board of Education has done now. You're identifying people who need the help, which is interesting, because you're really taking and I hope to not take liberties that you wouldn't ordinarily grant me, but you started this conversation speaking about Elena helping other people proactively, and it was as if she recognized that people needed the help, therefore she went and did it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a minor, a freshman in school, and obviously she had been doing that before that, or it wouldn't have been quite so easy for her. So we're taking lessons now at the Board of Education, down through law enforcement, with schools, from a freshman who forfeited her life. And so because she gave us the example of, I know this person needs the help and I'm willing to help them. We need to be taking that example ourselves and saying, thank you, Elena, for the lesson. I'm sorry that this came to pass, but oh, by the way, it won't have been for nothing. We're going to help the people that we know need it. It's no more complex than that, Ryan.
It really is. I think every day, and I don't say this often enough. I love all of my all of my children. We talk a lot about Elena. I've got some absolutely wonderful kids that just, I'm so proud of all of them and what they're doing and what they've become and who they are. But I do think about Elena and how can I honor her? And I'm not perfect at that. I'll tell you, I'm more than happy to get in a tussle on Twitter over the Second Amendment or some policy or something that I don't like. Sometimes I wonder, whether it's productive or not. But what I was hoping we could do is get to the point. The last thing I want to do, Michael, I mean, I talk tough and everything like that, but the last thing I want is for one of those guardians to have to pull the trigger and end a threat. I feel like if we've gotten to that point, everything else we've tried to do to stop this has failed. And then we need to look at that. Why did it fail? Did we not know about this? Did we not act on the information? Did we not lock a gate or a door? All that other stuff, all this other prevention stuff, we got to go back and reevaluate, make sure we looked at that. Because, as I went through the Guardian training and what we teach them, I mean, some of these are teachers and we have a very frank conversation with them. Michael, you may know this student. You may have taught this student. Are you capable of ending a threat if it's somebody you know and cared about and maybe even taught at some point? And so that's a really tough conversation. And that's a decision that they have to make in an instant, but have to live with for a lifetime, taking another person's life. If, for me, I'll tell you my philosophy. If I can save my own life or the life of others, I'm gonna take that shot. I'm gonna take the shot. I've already made the decision. I don't have to think about it. I've done the training. I'm gonna do it. I'm done. I'm gonna do it. So, but I don't want it to get to that point because now we've impacted a bunch of lives, and that person's gonna live with that decision, and hopefully they're comfortable with it. What I really want to do is prevent these things from happening. And to your point, the earlier we can do that, the more we can help this kid that's going off on the wrong path and getting their life back. And just think of how much better it is. We don't have to end a life. We don't have to, deal with with a potential tragedy or additional loss of life. We get back early when a kid's just being disruptive at school, or he's been hanging around the wrong group of kids and they're influencing him or trying to convince him to be a school shooter or whatever that thing is. If we can get there and get them on a different path, we got a lot of really good options, and it ends up better for everyone. And I think that's what Elena would want to have happen.
Well, you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, or you put forth the idea, it doesn't happen here. We're down into the weeds a little bit now on what we might do to get ahead of things so that the evil wasn't propagated. Well, it does happen from time to time. In fact, it happens a heck of a lot more than what people understand. And I think that the public has no idea how many of these plans are thwarted. And because it isn't making on the news, law enforcement doesn't want these things out there because it might inspire or breed some fire in somebody to try it themselves or take it to the next level. So it's not discussed.
Right.
And maybe that's the best prerogative. But at the end of the day, this idea that it doesn't happen here is false. So do you want to expound on that at all?
Yeah. Look, the year before the Parkland tragedy, Parkland was voted or recognized as the safest city in Florida. This was the place you went to in South Florida anyway. If you could get there, it was good schools, good place to live, very safe. Nothing happened in Parkland. That was the joke almost. And obviously I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. The thing that maybe I could answer your question this way, Michael. Let me give some advice to parents about what you can do, because what I want them to take away from this conversation is it can happen anywhere, and it can happen to you. And I pray that it doesn't. And I'm doing everything that I can. And there are others like me that are doing everything they can to prevent this from happening. But a few things you need to understand and ask questions. And your most powerful tool, I think, as a parent is just to ask questions and not to settle for the first answer. But you should know whether your school district has an active shooter policy or not. And what is that policy? How do they handle that? Does that policy inform their training on how to prevent casualties in an active shooter situation? They drill for fires, right? And earthquakes and probably tornadoes and other things, right? So what are you doing to prepare your students and staff for active shooter? I had a conversation yesterday with some reporters who asked me a question about, aren't we traumatizing our kids when we drill? And I said, I almost got upset. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about damaging the fragile, children with active shooter drills. No, we don't damage. No one questions whether we should do an evacuation drill for a fire or a hurricane or a tornado or whatever. We don't worry that we're damaging their fragile existences. No, we teach them what to do in certain situations. That's empowering, to use a term of the left. They like to be empowered, so we're empowering them. We're giving them knowledge, and then we're giving them the ability to act, to protect themselves. I think it's a wonderful thing. So you should train. Do you lock classroom doors and building doors? Are they locked during school? And then the other thing is, are there school resource officers, and what, are other authorized individuals, because of the gun-free zone, authorized folks allowed to carry firearms in the school? And if not, if they don't have an active shooter policy, red flag. I mean, absolutely not to use the term red flag, but Michael, I get my kids out of that district. If they don't have an active shooter policy, that means none of those other things are happening. So I homeschool, whatever you got to do. You got to get them out of that. That's an unsafe environment. Second is, on the training piece, do you train? How often? What does that look like? Do you train with local law enforcement, the first responders that are going to be coming? One of the things we saw in Parkland, we see so often, is the first responders that are coming have never trained at that school. They don't know where the buildings are. They don't know where the classrooms are. They don't know the school administrators. So, again, one of the things we do in Florida, local responding law enforcement has to be part of every drill that we do. So they know the procedures, they know the buildings, they know the people. You don't want to exchange business cards on the day of a tragedy. You want to have those relationships pre-established, and you want to know those. I know that principle, and I know where that building is, and I know how to get there quickly. So that's important. So those are the things I would say, Michael, to answer your question. I know it's not probably exactly along the lines of what you asked, but that's what I would do as a parent. Just be prepared and ask questions. And if they can't, if they say, no, we don't have something, why? Why don't you? Yeah. One of your most powerful questions is why. Just keep asking why. And then get to your school board. Get to your school board and get that changed.
Well, people don't want to ask the word why. I live in a small community. So the town nearest me is 1,000 people. Everybody knows one another pretty much. And so school board members are friends with obviously local parents. And so local parents probably don't want to take them to task face to face. Now they'll probably say something snide on social media through this, vicarious apparition of themselves, which is stupid. Sorry, it is, but they won't really go to a school board meeting and say I'm concerned because of this. So you need to be willing to ask appropriate questions without worrying about offending somebody. And if they're offended, well, okay, then let's hope that they're not offended too long, but I still deserve an answer, so let's be honest about it. And a part of the problem here is, I think, just like passing a law after a tragedy, just like having an attacker response on paper, we do that in a school, or we do that at the legislature, and then we say, "Oof, we needed to have done something, and we did something. We feel better now." Well, I don't care. What you've done doesn't matter if you don't practice it. And what if you don't practice it, then it's another false sense of security. It might as well be a gun-free zone sticker. So if you're going to put these plans in place, you're so right, Ryan, you have to practice them and be mentally prepared for them. And everybody has to be involved or it doesn't work. And I think that we often get our, we got a 3-ring notebook. We've got a pre-prepared response. It's color-coded even. Look, we used all the colors in the rainbow for this thing. It's all going to work out. Oh, by the way, do you practice it? Do you actually know it? And oh, by the way, do the bad guys know it? Yeah, they know it too. So are you truly mentally prepared and physically prepared to do what you need to do? And the answer to most of those questions is almost always no. But you can be. And so I think that's what we're really striving here for. And I don't want that to be lost in the shuffle.
No, it's an important element. We know this as firearms owners, training, regular practice at the range and training. So I love training and the kids don't mind the drills. They love it. But the most important element of that are the school administrators to get a chance to practice and see what worked and what didn't and improve the process, right? This continuous improvement that they can do by doing the drills. The question is how many and how often and all that. And we've had debates over that in Florida. And I you know what I'll tell you, what we found, there's no right answer. If you want to do a few more drills, great. If you want to do a few fewer drills because your community does, I don't know, just do them and make sure you've got somebody there that's documenting what happened in the process. And that you sit together, in the software space, we call this the retrospective, right? We get together after and we say, what went well, what didn't work, what should we continue doing, what should we stop doing, those kinds of things. Have that conversation and be willing to make those changes and then try your plan out the next time, the next drill, and see how it works. But so important that you give everybody on that school campus should know their role during an event, whatever that is. They should know what to do. And again, I'll use that word. They should be empowered with the information and the tools and the ability to do that. And the only way that happens is through training.
Yeah, I agree. There are deep dives that I would like to take on probably 4, and I'll go back through and watch this again to see if I missed anything, because when we're in real time, it's a little tougher to formulate some of those. But there are deep dives I'd like to take on 3 or maybe as many as 5 components that you've outlined. And would it be inappropriate to ask see if you'd come back and talk with us again about some of those specifically? Because I'm really interested in this Guardian program, what components there are. I'm interested in how law enforcement can liaise with the schools who are seeing this young boy or this young girl is having these problems. They're consistent. There has got to be something that we can do in unison with the family or whatever it needs to be in order to help. I'm interested in some of those things. People who oppose folks like me and folks like you, Ryan, are under the false impression sometimes, I know they've said them to me, that I'm heartless and I just love guns. Well, I don't particularly care about guns in the grand scheme of things. I know that some people may not understand that, but I really don't. I care about human life. And I want to protect it whenever I can from threats. And it's no more complex than that. So if we're going to agree that it doesn't happen here is a really silly thing to think, because it does and it can and it may, then what we really are saying is how are we prepared for it if it does happen? Well, hoping that somebody calls 911 in a reasonable amount of time and that response is reasonable, both of which are defined as seconds, sometimes minutes. And when they get there, that they can assess what's going on inside of a closed building, isolate whatever problem this may be, and stop it. Yeah. Golly, that's minutes, sometimes much longer than that. And in minutes, irreversible damage is happening. So are we going to be honest and say the only really way to handle this is to be there and be willing or not? To me, that's it. And I think that requires it doesn't require mental gymnastics, Ryan, but it does ask us to think about some things that are really, really tough for us to do. And we need to have those conversations, as hard as they are. And we need to do this as you have today, sensitively and earnestly. So thank you very much for your willingness to come talk with us, to explain to us what has happened, what you've done in response, what other people have done with you. And thank you for your willingness to share. I spoke with you before about this, and I wasn't willing in any way, shape, or form to put myself or you in a position to profit somehow from the death of others. I can't abide that. And so I hope very much that we have avoided that, and that what we're really doing here is putting in place ideas and hopefully policy and actions in the future that contribute to know this, or as few as humanly possible, because that's what we're really trying to hammer out here today. So thank you for that. Thank you for your faith. Thank you for sharing both your experience, the responses, and sharing your faith. It was obvious. And I'm very pleased. Is there anything that we want to talk about before we sign off? I mean, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to, Ryan?
I think just one thing, and Michael, I'd love to come back. I'm happy to do deep dives. I think I appreciate the time today. I think we've honored Elena and efforts to make schools safer, and hopefully parents and gun owners and citizens in Iowa that watch us and listen will be inspired to ask questions in where their kids go to school, and for that matter, where they go to church. They should ask these same questions, because churches are just as vulnerable targets. But start the process of making these schools a safer place. A sticker on the gate, a sticker on the wall that says gun-free zone isn't protecting your child or your wife or your husband that's inside those walls. We need to take this seriously. And I'm happy to deep dive on those other things. And I'll just say one last thing, Michael. We are so fortunate to live in the time and the country that we live in. We are at a unique point in human history. Yep. Very few people like you and me have been able to live with the liberties and freedoms that we enjoy, secured by our freedom of speech, our right to keep and bear arms, and the constitutional protections that we have. So few human beings in all of human history have experienced what we experienced, that I'm grateful to a Heavenly Father that allowed me to come to this earth at this time in this country, in this nation, with these freedoms and protections. And I'll end by saying it is the Second Amendment that ensures the continuation of those freedoms. It secured them initially. The Second Amendment, the principle of being able to be armed and bear arms protected it. It was codified in the Second Amendment, and it's what I believe prevents tyranny from taking over. If America fails, and we can't allow America to fail, if America fails, the rest of the world will fall into tyranny. America is the last great and best hope for a free world, and I believe our God in heaven would like us all to be free, so that we can choose to follow Him and return and live with Him some day. That's how important this stuff is, and so I appreciate the opportunity to share that message anytime I can.
Thank you. I haven't done this in the past. I've never actually been compelled. Maybe I should be reconsidering this. But would it be okay if we ended with a prayer and then I'll end the recording? Are you okay with that?
Absolutely, Michael. All
right. Dear Lord, thank you for this conversation today. Thank you for this guest. Thank you for things that are very hard for us to understand. And we know, Lord, that if we don't ask you to come, if we don't actually say or think May your spirit come and permeate us, that probably no real change is able to come to fruition. And we understand that about planting seeds and showing them light and watering them. We understand that after you sat the disciples down at the Sermon on the Mount and you walked through the Beatitudes, you immediately said, now that you're equipped with these 8 Beatitudes, be salt and light. So we must be preserved and preserve others, and we must be seen. This is part and parcel to loving you and loving one another. So let us keep that in mind. And thank you again for Ryan Petty, his family. Thank you for Elena and those children like her. May they not have died for nothing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.